Okay, so there might be a few sensitive issues that come up. Obviously, the topic that we're talking about could be a trigger for some people. So if you feel you need some support afterwards, if you could just hang on at the end of the webinar, and both Michal, myself and Majini will be available to talk things through. If there are any questions that come up, if you can put them into the chat. There will be, after each speaker, there'll be a few minutes if you do have questions for that speaker, just to ask them. So hopefully, and because this is quite a small group, I'm hoping there'll be areas for, you know, sort of discussions and things. We might get one or two more other people join, but it's not a huge group, so hopefully that should all be fine. And I'd like to send an evaluation via email, if that's possible, to everybody that's here, just to talk about how the webinar went, what other things that we can do as Somerset Diverse Communities. So let's get the show on the road. So my name is Justna. I work for Somerset Diverse Communities, which is part of the Community Council for Somerset. My role is a community engagement officer for ethnically diverse communities in Somerset. So I work in South Somerset and the Mendip area. We do so many different things. So my colleague Michal is there on the right, and also my colleague Janine, who is the Interfaith and Belief Coordinator. Our main role is to support ethnic diverse communities to become vocal and to thrive in Somerset. For a long time, these communities have been marginalised. So it's amazing that, you know, this project, this organisation exists. We do lots of different projects. We are very kind of needs-led and very flexible, and our funders have been amazing that we can be flexible so that we can meet the needs of our communities. So at the moment, it seems to be all around English classes for lots of different people, mainly Ukrainians, the Ukrainian refugees. So we've got one set up in Wales at the moment. I'm looking to do a conversation class in Glastonbury for women, or women in the area that would like to learn English on a conversation level. And that also brings together lots of different communities. One of the big things that we do are multicultural events. We had Bridgewater together last weekend. We've had yoga together. We're setting up Chard together, supporting that. There's Multicultural Froome that we support as well, and we're hoping to run Taunton together again in the near future. And that's just a place for everyone to come together and celebrate culture and diversity and have those discussions that often you wouldn't be able to have in any other arena, you know, where it's okay to discuss race and culture and things like that. So basically, in a nutshell, we do many, many other things, but I think I could go on all day if I went on. But basically, in a nutshell, that's what we do. What I thought we could do now is just go around a quick introduction as to who we are and what organisation we're from, or if you're here as an individual, if that's okay. If you'd rather not, then that's fine as well. If you don't want to be recorded, but I think nobody said that. It's fine. So without further ado, Rachel, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hiya. My name's Rachel Crow. I'm a midwife at Yeovil Hospital, but I'm here as an individual today. When I did my midwifery training, I did a literature review that's been published about maternal inequalities in maternity care. So that's why I'm here today, to talk about bias.
Thanks, Rachel. Janine. You're still on mute. Yeah.
Yes, sorry. I thought you'd already introduced us, so I wasn't ready. I'm the Interfaith and Belief Coordinator for Somerset Diverse Communities, and my role is actually to identify and support communities across Somerset from minority faiths and beliefs, and to create a network so that people can come together and engage with each other and with the wider Somerset community.
Perfect, thanks, Janine. Next is Jo on my little screen.
Oh, hi, I'm Jo Gill, and I work as the operational manager for public health nursing in Somerset. So that's the school nurses and health visiting.
Perfect, thanks, Jo.
Thanks.
Michal.
Good morning, everyone. So as Justin said, together we are trying to make diverse communities in Somerset more vocal, more visible. And I'm glad that you are with us this morning. Thank you.
Thanks, Michal. Greg.
Hello, everyone. My name is Greg, and I am the HR manager for CCS, which is the umbrella part, obviously, for Jess and Michal and Janine as well. So looking forward to today.
Thanks, Greg. Vienna.
Hello everyone, good morning. I'm Vienna, and it says United for Black Lives because I am originally the co-founder of Black Lives Matter Taunton, but we will be transitioning into becoming United for Black Lives Taunton, which is a coalition of different BLM groups around the country working together to create more community cohesion. I'm also part of Kill the Bill campaign, Justice for Chris Calvert campaign, activist, campaigner, youth worker, support worker, speaker, trainer. Really great to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Vienna. Ram, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ram Poon. I'm an officer in the British Army. I'm from the Gurkha Regiment. I don't know whether you know about the Gurkhas a bit more later on during my talk. But currently I'm working with the Army Engagement Group, and I am the Diversity Engagement Team Leader. Obviously, we went to your Bridgewater together as well. That was a fantastic event, and pleased to join today with you as well. So a bit more from me later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ram. Thank you. Gina, please.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, I'm Gina. So I'm from a research organisation called Research Your Way, and we are doing some evaluation work for Somerset Diverse Communities. So basically looking into the impact of the work they've been doing and how they can help organisations going forward. So I'm here more as an observer, really. But we will be sending out a survey and things. So just to say, like, to keep a lookout for that, and it will be great to kind of speak to you more in the future.
Thanks, Gina. Thank you. Maxi.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, my Wi-Fi is really iffy this morning, so I'm going to keep my camera off. But hello, the sun's out. I am the community person for Plus Positive People. We support anyone who is unemployed, excuse me, living in Somerset, sort of furthest away from the job market for whatever reason. And yeah, so I'm just kind of here to learn something new and find out what's happening and see how I can support our participants, my colleagues, and everyone really. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you. John. Are you there, John? No, okay. Krista?
I think I must be on the same internet as Maxi because I've had to lose my camera as well because my signal, I don't know what's going on in Somerset today. I'm Krista and I work for Headway Somerset, and we're working with people across the county with an acquired brain injury. We know we need to do loads better, and that's why I'm here, so I can learn more and meet more people and find out how we can do better to engage from people from different cultures.
Perfect. Thanks, Krista. And Michelle, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Michelle Golpalli, and I serve as the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion for the for ECRI, which is the Emergency Care Research Institute. I'm here to learn, and I am very much looking forward to this. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Michelle. Perfect. What I thought I'd do is, before I introduced Greg, just to talk a little bit about terminology. I think people really struggle with terminology around race. It's one of those things that's always changing, like language is always changing, discourse is always changing. Something could happen in society and suddenly that term is not politically correct anymore. And I found a lot of my colleagues and other white counterparts find that a really difficult conversation to have often. And I think it's really important that we do air that. So we've moved away from the term BAME, which is Black, Asian, minority, ethnic, and also ethnic minority, because there's a negative connotation attached to both of those terms. It implies that everybody from a diverse background racially is one homogenous group. It also implies that those people are a minority in the country or in a place, and that's not often true. You know, people from diverse backgrounds, racial diversity in the world, we are the global majority. So it's really important that these terms, that we understand where things are changing. I think at the moment, it's around ethnically diverse communities. I think that's the preferable term at the moment that we're using as an organisation. And I'm just doing a survey at the moment where I'm asking people in Somerset how they would like to be defined. So hopefully those results will be out shortly, and then we'll be able to define people in different reports and things like that as they would like to be defined. Few years ago, I probably would have defined myself as politically Black, politically as in inverted commas. I think now I would probably define myself as being Asian or British Muslim or lots of other different labels. I think after sort of the George Floyd murder, it changed slightly. And I think probably different people have different opinions on this, but for me, it felt like the Black community took that terminology back. And I was having conversations with different people around, you know, if you're Asian, can you still be Black? Should you not be defining yourself as a Bangladeshi or an Asian or whatever that is? And, you know, there are new terms that are coming up. For example, people of color is used quite often. That's come across from America, but a lot more people are comfortable using that. But what I would say is, what one person is comfortable using isn't the same as another person. So if you know, we've had discussions where, you know, we've had a network of Black women in a room, and a lot of people there were from a mixed race or mixed heritage background, and different people were saying they'd like to be defined in a different way. One person said, well, I don't want to be mixed race because race is not a biological thing, so why are we even using the term race? And somebody else was saying, well, I'm mixed race, I'd still like to be called mixed race. So I think it's about asking people and opening up that dialogue and conversation around terminology, because if you don't, it can actually be really oppressive towards people, and just being aware that it's okay to ask as long as it's in the right way. So I thought I would add that in there, although it's not part of the whole workplace, but I think it's really important because people do feel really, really uncomfortable about that. Before I move on to Greg, I just wanted to give you a couple of statistics just as an overview about race and in employment generally. So the first statistic was from the census, the 2021 census. And there are bits that are coming out at the moment. The full report hasn't come out, but actually the last census found that 1 in 6 people living in England and Wales in 2021 were born outside of the UK. So that's huge. 1 in 6 people living in England and Wales in 2021 are born outside of the UK. That's what we're dealing with. Statistics from Race Equality Matters, which we'll talk about later. They're an organisation that promote racial inclusion in the workplace. They found that 75% of ethnically diverse employees say that they've experienced racial discrimination in the workplace. And the majority believe little progress has been made in the last 12 months. They've also found that 1/3 of the FTSE 100 companies have no ethnic minority board members. So this is happening at the moment. The Equality and Human Rights Commission 2016 found that on average, Black workers with degrees earn 23.1% less than their white workers. And the Gender Pay Gap campaign in 2018 found that in the UK, ethnic diverse workers are paid around 3.2 billion less than their white counterparts every year. So I think this issue is happening, and it's so lovely that we've got, you know, a huge range of people around the table that we can discuss it. So without further ado, I'll introduce Greg, who is our HR manager. Over to you, Greg.
Thank you, Jasna. Scary, isn't it, when you say those numbers? I was just trying to work out of the survey that I think, don't quote me on this number, but it's 65 million people in the UK now, I think, or it might be higher than that. So that's going to be over 10 million people on that statistic in terms of the 1 in 6. So yeah, we've got work to do, haven't we? So So I'll start talking around the couple of bits that Justin has obviously invited me to talk to you all about today. And I might touch on some of the topics that others are going to talk about. I think obviously Rachel's going to cover bias, so I won't dwell too much on that. But what I wanted to talk to everyone about is in terms of, I think, as just as explained, there's an issue out there, and every step that any organisation makes to close that gap, to be more inclusive, to have a better approach to how it targets, ethnically diverse communities and employment. And I think that there's very much a narrative that certainly when I talk to fellow professionals that I think it happens sometimes in terms of with Pride Week, etc., that it doesn't become a tokenism by organisations. And I think that's really, really critical for me, that it's not something that you feel you should have to do. I think that's the starting point for any organisation. It's something that is fundamental to being a good employer and a good organisation, and right for Somerset and the wider piece in the UK. So my kind of angle, and I've thought long and hard about this, is kind of thinking more about how to be inclusive as an employer. And I think that's a term that sometimes gets clouded by diversity. The two are very, very different in terms of how you approach when you look at your organisation, in terms of what you want it to be and what it needs to be inclusive. So inclusion in terms of being equitable, what does it mean? And I think that's sometimes where people can get stuck in organisations when they look at equality. I'm sure at some point today the graphic may pop up with, I can't see everybody, so I won't necessarily get nodding heads, but the graphic that pops up with the fence, with the people looking over the fence, and about it being, having equality, everyone gets the same size box to stand on to look over the fence, but not everyone can still look over the fence. Whereas if you're equitable, you look at actually individual needs. And I think that's where inclusion really drives down even further into that point, because being inclusive is about how you understand what inclusion is in your organization. So in terms of people and their fit. So this is the bit where I think, I will look at CCS as well, and certainly my background and career working in some super large organizations as well, that an individual's fit is just as important as in the wider piece, and looking at either in terms of race or other areas of making sure that you're targeting there. So you need to understand what's going to bring the best out of your employees, that is then going to promote that diversity within your organization. And I will share a conversation again that I had with Justin the other day around a situation happening in a large employer in Somerset, where in terms of the ethical diverse communities were in an employer were very much a large proportion of employees in that organization, but fundamentally were not represented at any form of sort of management or anything like that, which really is a problem for any organization, because why wouldn't that natural talent come through? So where you look at inclusion is about talking and getting back out into your workforce, understanding by doing surveys, running reports, and looking at the pathways that people have for development. So pathways, I suppose, for an organization as how you recruit, to actually when people come in from ethnic diversities, to actually how the development needs can come through from their different educational barriers that have come that can be preventing people. So how do you bridge, how do you make it so that it's equitable for all? And that's again about understanding what your need is as an organization. What is it that is preventing people from wanting to join your organization? So again, feedback is really critical to understand what the narrative is. Sometimes it can be quite simple things, you don't pay enough, but fundamentally it's probably more about how you're actually perceived as an organization, whether there is this huge white wall in your organization and you're not giving yourself that opportunity to bring people in from diverse communities. So inclusion is critical in lots of layers, that you understand and get feedback. even in applications. So for myself, one of the things that we look at is how we look to promote our vacancies as an organisation. What prevents us or what stops us from getting people from diverse communities to apply? And we have varying degrees of success, but sometimes some of the areas that we have there are about getting feedback from application. So we will go back out and talk to people and understand why they haven't applied to job centres in other areas. We're very, very fortunate that obviously we have Somerset Diverse Communities as well. So to understand why perhaps we don't have a higher attrition rate for people from diverse backgrounds. So inclusion is across the board for any organisation, to find out what it is that potentially is your blocker, your stopper. But also if you are having success as well, what's promoting that. And I think I touched on the bias piece that obviously Rachel was going to cover in a big way, but your organisation ethos can have internal biases from its leadership through, and they can be very, very challenging and very, very hard to pinpoint through surveys. But there will be a reason that's stopping certain things from happening, and it will probably indicate to the behaviours of the culture of that organisation. So when we talk about diversity and inclusion, having a strong EID policy, so equality, inclusion and diversity policy, to look at why your organisation potentially might be stopping internally promotion is really key. So I think the big piece to me is there's kind of like 5 key actions that really drive an inclusive workforce. The first one that you want to check is your employee behaviour. So you can do that from observation and you can do that from surveys, but that will be one that really will drive why you're not seeing, or if you are seeing, certain trends of people going for promotions or joining your organisation. That's very, very critical to understand, is the employee behaviour. The other one can be a sensitive one, but it's line manager capability. In many organisations, people become managers because they've stayed on a few hours, or they've shown some capacity to do a certain task, or they've been the best candidate out of the rest, and sometimes that's not necessarily means that they've got the full breadth of tools to be a capable manager or leader in an organisation, that they fully understand their responsibilities and their own biases that may prevent them from actually promoting the right people in the organisation for that individual, but also for inclusion. Senior leadership has to be tied in with those areas to look at, because the role modelling of a senior leadership team is critical. It sets the standard for the whole organisation. So that's something you definitely, if you are, it turns on today, one of a senior leader, that is definitely looking in that mirror and understanding what you're doing to promote it, and also what questions you are asking yourself as an organisation. You need to have policies and practices that promote the right inclusion techniques, if you like, that are very, very critical. That's it's partly a legal background point, but fundamentally it's a very strong platform to stand on when you're doing any form of recruitment, to make sure that you are representative of and fair to all for application. And then once people are in the organisation, that they understand what the capacities and rules are that you will abide by. And then I think probably last but certainly not least is the culture, the climate and the values of an organisation. Do your values, do you have values? Do they represent what you want to be as an employer? Because in the modern working world, and again, I'm going to quote a statistic that might have changed slightly, but in fundamental terms, most people, certainly for generations before mine, and I'm going to say I'm 21, but clearly I'm not, but in terms of generations coming before, the average time in employment will be 2 to 3 years in a role. So if you're in a role for 2 to 3 years, it's not the kind of job for life, the career progression. People can change jobs, change roles. There is a lot more fluidity in terms of how people approach employment. One of the fundamental attractions for people that want to come and work for an organisation is the value fit, and that becomes more and more important. So again, if you're not attracting people from ethnically diverse communities, then maybe your values aren't meeting those needs. They're not saying the right thing, and that's a very, very critical one. And that will then obviously give you a framework for culture. So that's kind of really the bits I could talk for a long time about this subject. I'm very passionate about it. But in terms of for any organization, I would say is fundamentally just to stop, reflect. There are numerous tools available. ACAS have tools, CIPD have tools available where you can actually do a kind of inclusion review, and they can give you some guidance and pointers. So I can share those links with Jusna at a later date, and then get them out to the group. But yeah, if not, Google will find them. There are many available. So that's it from me. I think that's hopefully enough, Jusna, for you in terms of something to kick us off with today.
Yeah, definitely. That was just really, really interesting. The 5 points in particular, I think, when an organisation wants to start this journey, it's really difficult to know where to start. And I think that's a really good starting point as to let's have those conversations, have the surveys, but also that in-depth talking to people on the ground. It's really important. And just picking up on something you said, Greg, about diversity and inclusion, and I read this quote once. It's about diversity is being invited to the party and inclusion is being asked to dance. And I thought,
good.
I love that. It just brings it home as in what that actually means. And I think people get confused in organizations. Well, we're diverse. We have lots of people from different backgrounds and cultures, and, but actually that inclusion is the important part as well. So, yeah. Thanks, Greg. Are there any questions from anybody that they'd like to ask Greg from what he's talked about, or just generally from an HR perspective? You can either put it into the chat or just unmute yourself and talk. No, I think you've covered everything, Greg.
There you go.
But what would you say would be the first point of call if somebody was, an organization like, okay, this is our journey now? What would you say this is the starting point of what you need to do? What would be the first thing?
I think the very first thing that you'd want to do is make sure, I think we touched on it at the end, is actually to make sure that your values fit to what you want to achieve. I will hold up that values can be very much wallpaper, unless they are really linked to an organization, and that's the key part, because it gives you that framework then to go out from. So you need to understand the climate you're in as well, and I think that's also important. I think an example I touched on that we shared the other day, that in terms of that climate is probably calling out for people to actually be promoted and to actually have a better representation of diversity across its leadership. But the problem is no one can seem to get anyone to come through, and I think that's a fundamental point, that your framework is wrong, because you're not listening, you're not understanding, and secondly, you're not having the pathways for people to develop and go, or that they feel it's not worth doing. So that my first starter would be to do a look in the mirror and to understand what your values are, and then to piece back from that why perhaps you're not seeing the level of attrition that you want in those areas.
Brilliant. What would you say to somebody who, or an organisation that we're living in a rural county? We don't see people from ethnic diverse backgrounds. How do we look at ourselves in the mirror if there aren't the people there? Yeah,
I think there's again, in terms of looking at sort of quotering, I think you have to be realistic around where your employees are coming from, and in terms of what that will mean. But it doesn't mean you still can't be inclusive or promote an inclusive framework, because people can obviously remote working and hybrid working now. Actually, there's probably more and more reasons why your point about the rurality of an organization perhaps actually is less relevant. Could be employing somebody from Edinburgh for all we know in the future. So I think that I would say that's kind of touching on a little bit of a bias or just a kind of easy conception to, you know, to make. And I think the statistics that we've kind of very roughly come on, that over 10 million people, you know, I think that kind of really probably is less you know, representative in that regard, and probably is not, you know, I would say you need to look at your culture if you're thinking in those lines, because that's probably a very outdated and outmoded way of thinking now.
I do get those comments, that's why I just wanted to put them across to you.
Yes, gently push back. They probably
Yes.
just need to just reflect a bit, because it's that doesn't sound very fluid in a workflow point of view. In fact, that, you know, we you know, I was on a call the other day actually with somebody from Microsoft who's based in Egypt, and you know, and they were actually from America, that would, you know, so that you know, we don't live in that world, that people just live in their little towns and don't see it. And if people think like that, then I think Rachel will have to do some work on the biases there.
Thanks, Greg. Thank you. That was so informative. Thanks so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, brilliant. We're going to move swiftly on to Vienna, who is going to talk to us about mental health, allyship, and supporting colleagues from ethnic diverse communities. So Vienna, take it away.
Hello. I just wanted to know, can I share my screen? And if not, I have got my presentation on my phone so I can run through it. You're on mute.
Sorry. Trying to be polite by putting myself on mute. Yeah, yes, you can. Yep, you can.
Amazing. I just want to say, as a disclaimer today, I'm having a very ADHD day. My brain doesn't seem to want to get into gear as much as it usually is. So I have my script and a lot of notes, if you haven't noticed me posting things on wall, because I'm like, I think I'm going to forget a lot of things potentially mid-sentence. I'm trying to caffeinate just to kind of get me to a normal level. But yes, away we go. Let's hope that my Wi-Fi isn't the same as everybody else's. Yeah, so there are quite a lot of obviously allyship, mental health, supporting colleagues. There's a lot of kind of things to pick up on, and I've only got 15 minutes, and I am awful at editing and time management. So just shout at me when we're done, and I will start. So obviously I'm going to be talking to you briefly today about kind of supporting colleagues within the workplace from, what's it now? Ethnically diverse backgrounds, because I'm always like, I always say marginalized communities, so this is like a new one I can add in as well, which is fantastic. And this is the best thing about language, again, is that we can kind of take ownership of that. We can go, actually, yeah, no, this isn't actually quite fitting with me. And again, there's a lot of terms to catch up on, and even with us working within these kind of sectors, we have to play catch up quite a lot of the time too. So yeah, so when we talk about equality, equity, inclusion, Jusna, you took away the example of inviting people. As soon as you said it, I was like, well, that one's gone. I was like, and then you said all my stats, and I was like, well, okay, that's gone too. And that's great, because I feel like sometimes when we're working within spaces, when we're trying to relay information to people that may not necessarily be experiencing what we're experiencing, it can kind of end up being an intellectual kind of debate, and we start throwing numbers at each other. And numbers are great, absolutely, and they back up our points when we want to kind of have those conversations, but we actually end up losing the human element of it, because people are people. Humans are humans, and we're not numbers. And I find that sometimes people use numbers as a way to erase the experience that individuals, communities are having. And so, you know, and I'm awful also at retaining number information. So I'm really glad that you kind of said some of those stats, so I don't have to worry about that. Yeah, so when we're also talking about equality, equity, and inclusion, we're also talking about discrimination, prejudice, and inequality, because within these spaces we're also going to be having these things simultaneously happening at the same time. And obviously, because there is no way to sugarcoat those experiences, So because unfortunately there is no way to sugarcoat the experiences that many from marginalized communities face in all areas of their lives, to put it simply, we cannot hug away racism and we cannot deny that it exists. And I feel that when we use the terms diversity and inclusion, a lot of places will use that as a way to hide the fact that there is actually a problem. And acceptance versus tolerance is kind of the key to going forward. It's also working within a restorative way and understanding that it's not just about focusing on potentially the people that are doing harm, the policies that are doing harm, the institutions and systems that are doing harm, but it's also about understanding that we need to be working within the people who are experiencing this, because we're always very quick to punish in the face of justice and equality. And what happens is that, again, those people who are being victimized and are experiencing this discrimination are again overlooked, and they kind of almost feel like then they're kind of being pushed away into obscurity. And that's the thing again with marginalized communities, they're already marginalized, so then they're having these experiences taken away from them and no one's actively listening. And the thing is as well with listening is not centering yourself within the conversation and understanding where your privileges lie, because we all have privileges, and it's time for us to start understanding that we aren't the be all and end all of absolutely everything that's occurring within our little vacuum. You know, there are other people with different lives, with different experiences, and we need to listen to those. And so what I found as well in the work that I do, so I'm doing teacher training in schools, looking at the conversations around race. And as Laura May Lindo said, who's a member of Provincial Parliament, in her TED talk that I watched yesterday, she said, we spend far too much time convincing white folks that racism isn't happening versus actually supporting and aiding those who are experiencing it. Now, let me just move this out of the way because I feel like that's in the way. There you go. Lovely. And so in fact, let's do some diversity training now, people. Okay, are you ready? So everyone's got their cameras off. So if you look around, you've seen our faces. Can you notice that we're all different? We're all different. Well done. We did diversity training, tick box. Simple as that. And again, this is the thing, you know, Greg was mentioning about tokenism. And the thing that, especially when we're talking about racial tokenism, is that it is, again, another form of racism. And the way that it does it is kind of a little bit more insidious, because what it does is it says, hey, yeah, we're totally hiring new people. And like, you know, we're doing movies and we're doing films and we're adding in these actors and things like that. But the thing is that the people in power still have the power. Because again, when we look within employment, as Jisma said earlier, 1.5% of people are in leadership roles, which is insane, because actually that's one of those barriers, isn't it? Is that we're going, okay, let's have a diverse workforce, but we're only having a diverse workforce on the lower levels within an organization, a company, a business, a school, etc., only on lower levels. So they're still managing to keep all of the power for themselves, and we don't have people within those positions. And as they say, you know, black and brown faces in spaces and black and brown faces in high places, because again, even for children, for us, we're constantly fed this image of we don't matter. Like, you know, we never see necessarily success stories. We never see people that we can look up to, people that are our role models. So therefore, we never aspire naturally to actually want to do more. Or if we do want to do more, we know that we have to work 2-3 times harder in order to achieve the bare minimum of our white counterparts, which is a massive, massive problem. And so leadership is absolutely important, because again, racialized people need to be at the decision-making table to be more creative about solutions. But the most important bit is, because if we're not present, you won't believe that there's a problem. And actually, I've been in spaces where I have been present, relaying stories of people that I know and what I've experienced, and people still don't believe that there's a problem. And this is why representation really does matter. And again, if you look at workplaces, you know, they'll say racism isn't welcome here. And everybody can agree, racism is not welcome here. Any form of discrimination, prejudice, is not welcome within the places that we live, work, and socialize. But if you actually look closer, you'll realize that there are no real steps being taken to truly work on the issue. And this can be due to a lack of resources, lack of funding, lack of, again, representation, having people coming in and talking to them. You know, they don't have enough tools, but at the same time, we know that they got money and we know that they've got the resources for some places. And again, everything's being done very much on a superficial level. We saw this with Black Lives Matter back in 2020, as we call it, the Black Square Summer, where everything was performative. All of the allyship that we saw was superficial, tokenistic, and performative, and it was harmful. It created more division because people were so quick to do something that they didn't realize that actually the things that they were doing didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. You know, taking away, cancelling actors, cancelling TV shows, cancelling tweets and things like that. That is not how we work towards a community and a society that accepts and is inclusive of people around us. And this can have a massive detrimental effect on your staffing. This can have an effect on their families, because what happens is we're simultaneously having to work and live within a society where we're not welcome. And that can cause a lot of problems, again, for our mental health. And as an employer, and as a colleague even, we have a duty of care for each other. We need to work more restoratively and understand that we can't have superficial tick box exercises. It's not about just creating a little support group at your work for those from ethnically diverse communities. It's about offering them the right mental health supports. It's about working in a trauma-informed way, having trauma-informed frameworks in mind at all times, because people are experiencing all sorts of things before they come into work. That's anything, you know. Trauma is trauma, and I think we also need to recognize as well that trauma isn't the same for everyone. Two people can experience the same events and one may become traumatized, and trauma is the inability to feel safe. And so when you constantly receive microaggressions, racism and things like that, those tiny little chips away at you are what create that trauma, that racial trauma. And again, that's the same for people who are disabled. This is the same for women, trans people, you know, elderly people, any group that is marginalized within this society, neurodiverse people. I'm like, oh, that's me. You know, we need to understand that people, and also just people with mental health problems, you know, we need to understand that it is our duty of care to look after each other. And I think that, again, we're too busy looking at people like numbers. We're too busy looking at people just for money. And actually, we're not understanding that our work culture is so important. We spend 40+ hours a week within our jobs. You know, that's a big chunk of our life. And I mean, what's the retirement age? Like 65 now, 67? It's high. So we're going to be in work for a very, very long time. And we need to make sure that it's a safe place where people can feel that they can challenge and hold people accountable and check people. And it's not a place of judgment, because we will not learn, we will not grow as a society if we do not learn to stop just cancelling people and not conversing with people. And that could be, for example, maybe there are racist incidents happening at work, right? And you as an ally, I will stop, an ally, obviously, as we know, is someone who mobilizes their own privilege to help another community who is experiencing an inequality. And if you remember, A is for act. So act proactively. It doesn't have to be screaming and shouting and calling out every single racist that you see. Again, it's like we so focus on that type of action, when actually the person who has experienced this, we need to be focusing on them. Because again, when we look even at racism within policing, for me, being within within Black Lives Matter, United for Black Lives, we've spent a lot of time just focusing on getting a police officer, for example, with Chris Cabba, getting him fired, but the family still doesn't have their son. an unborn child still doesn't have their father. That was a main core member of that family that's been lost. That's another person who was earning money being lost. That's a community and a family that's been affected by this trauma, you know, and we actually need to start turning our focus onto them and actually then understanding what were the issues that led up to that moment. And we have to do that within our workplaces as well. We have to look and understand that, you know, what were the problems that led to this incident happening? Because it's not just on a policy level. We can all write papers, we can all fill out forms and things like that, but actually what are we doing as allies within our workplace to help those people? And again, a lot of that is restorative, and that is again focusing on mental health. That is us being aware of our biases. That is us being aware of our ideologies, our beliefs, our values. As Greg said, you know, what can we bring to the table on that side of things, you know, and how can we again work with those people who experience that to really listen to what do they want? Because us being in this space right now isn't enough. We can only theorize what they want. The only way you're going to know what they want is actually talking to your employees, and I think that's a really important thing. L is for listen. Actively listen. Don't center yourself within the conversation. Again, doing BLM, I've noticed a lot of fragility around the word racism, a lot of fragility around people. They feel targeted and they feel victimized themselves because they feel like, oh my gosh, like, you know, in order for you to be racist, we have this idea that racism, it means, you know, you're like this really extreme far right, I'm in the KKK type of thing. And actually, it's more insidious than that. It's more covert than that. These are systems that were built on colonial rule. You know, these are systems that have been around for hundreds and hundreds of years. We literally live and breathe this system. And it's kind of like saying to a fish that you need to be aware of water, but the fish isn't aware of water, it's surrounded by it. And that is literally what institutional systemic racism does to that. And understanding that when you are looking not just at racism, you're also looking at gender inequality. You're looking at, again, you're looking at disabled rights. You're looking at rights of other marginalized communities, LGBTQ rights, because again, this society was built by those in power. Our history is a reflection of those in power. Everything that we see benefits them. And so we need to start interfering with that power. We need to start dismantling that power, and we have to start doing that with ourselves. And as a community, we need to participate, and it needs to be a collaborative process. How am I doing for time?
You're bang on. So you're gonna, yeah.
Right, I'm just going to wrap up, okay?
Go for it.
Because actually, so what I want to just like finish, wow, I didn't do any of that, right? Is no sense, no sense of belonging. So if you again have employees that have no sense of belonging, plus no sense of urgency to address the racism, then what we have is cycles of racial injustice recurring in our workplace. And I think I can just finish with what can we do? Because you've done all the stats. So obviously report incidents, follow up. Oh, I didn't finish my acronym. Oh, wait, okay. The other L is for learn. So learn and unlearn your unconscious bias, which Rachel is going to talk about. So I'm not really going to go into that any further. She'll talk about how that affects our decision making, etc. And then Y is for yield your privilege, and actually start mobilizing that privilege. And it all starts with you. So again, being mindful of language, as Gisna said, don't be scared to get it wrong. It's okay to get it wrong. Every day is a school day. And this is why it's so important when we work in a trauma-informed way that we should be basically nurturing an environment where we feel safe to be able to do that. We feel listened to, we feel cared about, we feel counted, you know, and that's what inclusivity is. As Gisna said, it's about inviting you to dance, it's about inviting you to participate. We want you to be here. We want to make sure that you are happy, you're included. You can do things like the buddy system, just get talking, get learning, educate yourself, and that's it, people.
Your energy, Vienna. Oh my God. Amazing.
I had all of this paper. I was like, Vienna, it's not a TED talk. Yeah, it's 15 minutes, love.
But I think you covered it. I think you covered it beautifully, actually, from what Greg was saying. You know, you kind of moved it along. You talked about the mental health. You talked about how to challenge and things like that. It was amazing. And I just love your energy. Have we got any questions for Vienna? Anyone want to?
I'd love to see an entire hour where Vienna gets to present. I think I've learned so much in just this 15 minutes. Boy, whatever can you do in an hour, Vienna? But thank you.
Thank
yeah, no, I actually peak really soon. It's downhill from that. It really is.
No, it isn't. We were supposed to have a meeting last week. How long did it last? How long? I think it was like 3 hours in the end.
What was that for?
Our meeting with each other last week.
Oh my gosh, yes, that was a very long meeting. I'm doing currently school training and I have only an hour and a half, and that's already hard enough. I'm like, I need a TED talk. That's what I need.
It's amazing, the information with all the energy and the passion. It's just fabulous. Any sort of quick questions? No. Wow, you covered everything.
Do you have a question for me? I feel left out.
You me?
You asked Greg a question.
Oh, okay. What question? Okay.
One.
Favorite
color, red.
Okay, I got a question for you. You're saying about challenging challenging within organization. I've always found, as a person of color, I find it really difficult to do that challenging. It needs somebody there, like an ally, to kind of support that, because you do feel like you're putting your head above the parapet and you don't know what's going to happen. Although in this organization, it's completely different, because, you know, we are very much encouraged to do that. What advice would you give?
Well, as I touched on at the end, this is where allyship really, really comes in handy, because it's not your job necessarily to stick your head in the line of fire. It's not your job at all. Your job is to, once people have stood in the line of fire for you, is to then be able to have the space to speak, because this is what allies do. You know, we have to understand that it is, you know, you're at risk of potentially losing your job. You know, I lost my job that way, you know, after I was suspended, and I had no one there who had my back. And that's the thing, is that actually we need to make sure that people, and I think people don't understand how to be an ally. I think they understand it in theory, but they don't have enough practice. And I think actually having support where people can kind of look at doing like conflict resolution training and things like that, and actually gaining a better insight on how to have these conversations with management before, again, you're bringing in people from diverse communities into the space to talk. It's kind of like your job is to create the space for them, and then it's to step back. And this is the bit a lot of people have problems with, is the stepping back bit, you know. And it's like, you know, yeah, that's it.
Thank
you for asking me a question. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks, Vienna. Amazing as per usual. Okay, we're going to go on to the next person. You got to follow that, Rachel. You follow all that energy, although you do have pretty much a lot of energy of your own. So Rachel is going to be talking about her presentation is beta blockers for bias, how to recognize and challenge your own biases. Over to you.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, such a tough act to follow, Fiona. That was awesome. Thank you. Yeah, so what I'm going to talk about has been touched on, but I'm going to come at it from a slightly different perspective. As you can tell, I'm white. I was born in Yeovil, and I have white British parents, and my whole family are white British. So my experience, why I'm here and why I'm particularly interested in this is a few years ago, give me 1 second. I actually came across a Facebook post by a friend who had put up, oh my goodness, I think I might be racist. And my first reaction was to be like, no, Matt, don't worry, you're not racist, Allah. And I looked at what he was looking at, and it was the Harvard implicit association test. And oh, go on, I'll have a go. And I was so mortified. I did this implicit association test, and it turned out that I had this really strong bias against Black men. And I was really mortified. I thought, my goodness, I'm racist. I can't believe it. I was really gutted. And I thought, well, that's not really who I want to be. So let's read a bit more about that. So I did a lot of reading. I've done a lot of learning over the last 12 years or so. That was about 12 years ago. And it sort of led me to where I am today. So as I mentioned when I introduced myself, I recently published an article in the British Journal of Midwifery, which is my literature review from university. And like Justin was talking about language earlier, in a desperate attempt to not homogenize everybody who is not white British, I have this really clunky title of what do UK midwives perceive as the factors that contribute to ethnic inequalities for non-white British women? Which, you know, but actually I spent a lot of time trying to work out, how do I make sure that I do this right? How do I make sure that as a white person, I don't homogenize an entire group of people who are already 5 times more likely to die in childbirth, or 3 times more likely to die in childbirth? This is not an acceptable thing. And so actually for me to go out of my way and make a really clunky title is important. My learning about racism in particular has come a lot from actually knowing Justna and her very gracious summer that we spent together, where she taught me a lot about Islam. I realized I'd never learned about it at school, but also we've got kids the same age, and it's really highlighted to me my white privilege in a new way. I knew it was there before, but this is another level where I know that when our children go to the park, my concerns would be, are there any needles there? Are there any children there that maybe aren't very nice? But I will never, ever have to consider, will my children be subjected to racial abuse at the park because my kids have white skin? I'll never have that. And that's my privilege. I will never be concerned that my children are running around the streets in the summer, running around with water guns, because my children have white skin, and nobody will consider that anything other than children playing. And even to the point where I don't actually have to deal with racism today, because I don't have to, because it doesn't actually come to my door ever, because I don't have to deal with it. That is white privilege in a nutshell. It is an absolute privilege to not have to deal with these things. But the reality is that privilege is what is sustaining this systemic racism that feeds through our society in a really damaging and very dangerous way. When we ignore it, it becomes even worse. So I'm going to explain a little bit of brain chemistry to you. Bear with me, I'm quite a nerd. So our brains have separate parts to them, and different bits do different things. So a really, really important thing to know is that all of our brains react to what we see as difference. So in less than a third of a blink of an eye, we know when we see someone for the first time, we know their age, we know their sex, and we know their ethnicity. And we know that immediately, because that is a very evolutionary thing. It's a very much keep us safe thing. Is this person my family, or is this person the enemy? We have to make those judgment calls very quickly in terms of surviving. Not so helpful now, because actually that initial bias, that initial reaction in the amygdala fires up our amygdala, and it makes our adrenaline run if we see somebody who is different. Now that's a normal, typical response. It's not a racist response. It's not a terrible thing. It's just what happens in our brains, and it happens in everybody's brains. What happens next is the difference. So when people have been put through MRI machines, I love this tech, it's so cool, and shown pictures of people who are different. And what happens next is that from the amygdala lighting up and that initial, oh, that person's different to me, then the prefrontal cortex comes in. Now the prefrontal cortex is the most advanced bit of our brains. It's the bit right at the front, and it's the grown-up bit. It's the bit that we develop latest, and it's the bit that tells it to calm down. It's okay, it's fine, this person may be different to me, and that makes no difference whatsoever. What's really interesting is when they ran these tests, and people who had said, oh, no, I'm not racist at all, like I don't have biases, had a much slower reaction with their prefrontal cortex. People who said, oh, I hope not, but maybe I do, or maybe I have some biases, I don't really know, were much, much faster to have their prefrontal cortex kick in. So actually, when we ignore colour, and we say, oh, no, I don't see colour, love that one, don't see colour, wow, okay, wow, that's quite a thing to announce, because what we're saying is we're ignoring colour. We're also ignoring everything that's come with that person's upbringing, with their life, with all the racial abuse they may have got in the past, with all the things that they may have had to hold, maybe holding 2 different cultures at home, or whatever it is, having 2 different languages that they speak in 2 different places. Could be all sorts of things when people say, I don't see this. Actually, when people are aware that they might have biases, they are much less biased. We have to accept our own biases. And so I would say a really good first port of call is the implicit association test. Get prepared to get uncomfortable. Oh, it's not a nice feeling. But to be honest, if you're having a conversation about racism or ethnic inequalities or diversity, you should be uncomfortable. You're probably not having the right conversation, because as a white person, it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. I've had people say to me in the past, oh, I'm so sick of being blamed for things that happened hundreds of years ago, which I didn't lose the plot completely, because there's a massive lack of understanding there. We were paying for the tax loan of giving back money to people who were basically slave traders, who were told, like, oh, now we've said that slavery is illegal, we now have to reimburse you and give you lots of money. And we have been paying that up until, I think it was 2014. I feel like Vienna's
2015.
2015.
Yeah, it was yeah.
So when we say, I'm sick of being blamed for something that happened hundreds of years ago, that may have happened hundreds of years ago, but I've been paying that since I started working. I'm paying to reimburse slavers for their lost cargo. I am paying for people to have been made into cargo. And that's the reality of how long we forget really easily. And just because we think things are equal doesn't mean they necessarily are. I work in healthcare. And one of the things I think is really, really important is, am I actually part of the risk assessment for this person? Because we risk assess all the time in healthcare. We make a risk assessment based on this, that, and the other. Actually, am I part of the problem for this person? Is my own bias going to come into this room? Is my bias going to come into this situation and potentially cause more problems? Thing is, being aware of it instantly starts to dismantle that problem in the first place. So when we don't acknowledge it, or we get defensive about it, we're actually making the problem worse. Now, a fascinating thing, the reason that that my part is entitled beta blockers for bias is because propranolol reduces the amygdala's response and speeds up the prefrontal cortex for everybody. So we know that this is a very biological response in the brain, and we know that this is a very it's a very clear-cut thing that starts as a physiological thing and can become something that is out and out racist, or much more dangerous, very gentle nudging racism that just sort of slips through who we are and how we behave. Now, interestingly, I have spent a lot of time trying to dismantle my own bias, and I have retaken the implicit association test, and I have managed to get my bias down to neutral for Black men, which is fantastic. And the main reason, thank you very much, the main reason I would say that this has happened is firstly knowing it and addressing it, getting uncomfortable, getting really disturbed by that and wanting to do something about it. The second thing is I actively sought out ways to try and dismantle this, to try and understand what is going on and how do I change this. So for me, I work in the NHS. I realized before I did the initial implicit association test, I actually didn't know any Black men. The Black people that I knew were women, and we were married to white men. So I didn't actually have any personal experience. So all I had was what the media was telling me about Black men, which we know is really quite biased. So I made a deliberate attempt to get to know some of the doctors that I was coming into contact with and to chat to them about their children. And when they come in the office, I would deliberately say to myself, you have a bias. And I would deliberately consciously bring that to the forefront. And that's so that none of the things that happened in my brain could then be subconscious. They had to be conscious things. It's not, none of it's just about being that fish in water, totally unaware of it. You make yourself aware and then you start working on it. Another thing that I have done is that I have educated myself a lot. I think this is really, really important. It's really important for particularly white British people to know that it is not anybody else's job to educate you about racism. It's really not. It's your job to open your ears and open your eyes, but it's also your job to go and find out. most people don't have a problem with directing you, but actually it's quite exhausting to try and teach you when you've probably taught several other people through your life about racism to different levels of whether they wanted to know or not. I think this book's already been mentioned, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. Fantastic book. Another really good one is Black and British by David Olusoga. Really good. It talks about how Black Britain has been since the Roman times, and how sometimes when people say, oh, you know, things have changed, people's fear of having so much diversity that there's no longer white people is a fascinating concern, but actually how long Britain has been a diverse community for. These kind of books, I bought this one, Black History book for my kiddies, which is fab. I think I've done a lot more reading of it than them. I'm like, oh, look at this. Just finding out stuff and being curious and making sure. I got very excited at Castle Gardens this weekend in Sherborne. I sent just a photo. I got so excited because there was a fairy on the tree and she had black skin. And I couldn't believe it. I had never seen that in my life. There were angels, there were fairies. I'm like, great, let's go buy them. Let's show that there's a market, because this is really cool. So it's really, really important for us to do that education and to dismantle those biases. Interestingly, I did have a little worry that I had tricked the test, that I was just got really good at doing the implicit association test. Thankfully, not so. I did try it for, apparently I have this crazy bias for male and female pronouns and school subjects. Who knew? But it's really strong. So I figured that the test still works. So I must have actually dismantled the bias. Sometimes people will talk in terms of a health context. This is about biology, and people will talk about biology and things like that, and they'll use that argument. So things like when women when we've had these horrendous reports where women have been 5 times more likely to die in childbirth, or 1 year afterwards, or those numbers are coming down, interestingly, with the awareness going up, not fast enough, but they are going down. People sometimes say, well, maybe it's biology, and I think that is the most lazy argument, because biology I can't do anything about. I can't do anything about somebody's propensity to develop cancer or somebody's propensity to develop high blood pressure, but what I can do something about is change my bias. And I think we also need to be aware about microaggressions, because there is the most amazing researcher called David R. Williams, and he's at Harvard University, and he is professor of Black African American Studies. And he did it's got a TED talk, so it's much easier to read than all his papers. But he basically did some research into how minor acts of discrimination can cause poorer health. And so he took lots of teenagers in the States and looked at how many acts of discrimination they faced on a regular basis. They didn't actually feel very minor, but they were classed as minor. So like someone ignoring them or pushing in front of them or being served first or not getting the same treatment somewhere, actually damaged their health. And so the people that had more and more microaggressions happen to them became more and more obese, higher blood pressure, more likely to develop diabetes. And these things that are brewing, we need to recognize as well that it's not just mental health that gets damaged by this, it's actually physical health. People become more unwell based on the minor acts of discrimination. Others will be ill because of stereotypes against them. And also, we have to know that obviously trust is going to be lower. So you're going to have to work harder to build trust with somebody who has experienced racism or discrimination against them in a similar situation. So it's a really uncomfortable thing. Of course it is. It's really uncomfortable thinking, oh my goodness, could I be racist? It's a good question to ask, because the answer is yes, you could be. Can you do something about it? Yes, the answer is yes. Great, let's go with that. But it's so much worse being uncomfortable on a daily basis for those who live with minor acts of discrimination on a daily basis, knowing they've been overlooked for things, knowing that they have worked just as hard as somebody else and that other person has got that role. And they've overcome an awful lot more, and they have those skills that match, but they've actually done more work, or whatever it is that has caused that person to then be discriminated against. That is a much more uncomfortable position to be in. So my takeaway from this would be, actually, as somebody who has power, your job, and Vienna covered this beautifully, your job is to be noisy, is to be really noisy about this. The urgency to deal with racism isn't there, often because there aren't enough people being heard, and when people are there, they're being ignored. So actually, if you as a white person can be super noisy, and you can make a lot of noise, you can then step back and let other people speak and share their stories. It's not our job to take over. You're not a white savior. You're not here to fix it. Actually, people are able to fix their own discrimination. They're able to resolve issues, but they may not be given the platform to do that. So if you can raise that person up and give them that platform, they will be heard. So that is our job as allies. So if you have any questions, I am more than happy to take them.
Thanks, Rachel. Whenever I listen to Rachel's talks, it's just like, I'm not a scientific person, but you just make it so digestible and it makes sense. And it's just amazing. I learn something new each time I listen to you, Rachel, honestly.
Thank you.
We've got a question.
The question was actually going to be, I definitely have biases towards like white people, like against white people. And so, because we talk a lot about like other people's biases towards like people from ethnically diverse communities, gender and things like that. And I want to know, how would I go about trying to not be so biased towards white people? Yeah, because this, yeah.
I was going to say, I think that's quite hard, because actually, I would hazard a guess that bias may have come from experience.
Yes.
Yeah. And I would say that's quite a different type of bias than implicit bias. Implicit bias is just that insidious, it just sits there. We just assume it's wow, little brown boys with water guns, for maybe that, the mosque is teaching them to become terrorists. That's just sits there because there's been so much in the news a few years ago about Islam and radicalization. When we've experienced abuse on a regular basis by a particular group of people, I think that becomes then much harder to dismantle. And I would actually say probably needs addressing on a much deeper level in terms of trauma therapy.
Yeah, it was like therapy then.
Yeah, because I think there is a point at which you can surround yourself with people who will, and I think there is something to be said for surround yourself with people who will oppose that view for you and will enable you to have that more balanced view. For me, I had met a couple of Black doctors who weren't that great when they were with people. Like, that was my experience. I now know a whole load of male Black doctors who are flipping amazing, and they are great, and it counterbalanced that view that I knew was there. And I think actually if you can counterbalance it, that would be great. It might be quite hard to find, though, because people who are white, who are deliberately, because white people don't have to deal with racism, it's quite hard to find people who are really passionate about it and are very determined about it. So I think that is quite tricky, but I would say actually on that deeper level, definitely therapy.
No, absolutely, thank you. And it's because I'm sure there's so many in the same boat, and then I was like, oh yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. We're going to go for a break now, if that's okay. So if we go for a 10-minute break, meet back at 11:35, if that's okay. Have a cup of tea, a loo break, and then see you then.
Okay.
Back yet? Should be 36.
Oh
yeah, Greg's back.
I've been here this whole time.
Waiting behind the screen.
Yes.
Perfect. I'm going to hand over to Janine with a nice cup of tea there to talk about faith and beliefs in the workplace. Over to you, Janine.
Thank you very much, Justna, and thank you, everybody. This is a great topic and a great group of people to have this conversation with. I think I'm learning quite a bit. Just first of all, to touch on language. as you can all hear, I haven't spent my whole life in the UK, even though I was from here originally. And the language used in Australia, where I spent a great deal of my adult life, was multiculturalism. So diversity was never really used, it was multiculturalism. Then we moved to South Africa, where the language is very specific around particular groups, it is absolutely illegal to be racist in South Africa. So if you are caught doing it and somebody takes you to task, you will end up in jail. That does not mean it doesn't happen, but it does mean that, you know, there is teeth to the policy. So the language used on a daily basis is not derogatory language. It's language that actually denotes each particular group, because each particular group has historical issues, cultural norms, all of that type of stuff. So when I came to where am I now, the UK, I was still using that language, and Justina very quickly went, oh no, and I went, okay. So I still grapple with language a little bit, only having been back here 6 months. But I think, you know, we talk about the term minority, and where faith and belief is concerned, particularly in Somerset, it's really difficult not to use that word so that the majority understands how little representation of various faiths and beliefs there are in percentage to the population. And so, as I said, we had Interfaith Week, and people were expecting the same number of, you know, white mainstream people to turn up from different faiths and beliefs across Somerset. And really, if you look at the statistics, for every 100 white mainstream person, you'll probably get half a Sikh if you're lucky. So the numbers are really, really small. So it's difficult not to use the word minority in just trying to get it across to people. The numbers are really small. And so we do often get caught in this language trap of, you don't want to label somebody who, yes, is probably the majority of the world outside of this country, but in Somerset they're a really small part of the group. So you know, that is a difficult position to be in. But I kind of want to talk about inclusion, inclusive, including, and the difficulties I think that faced with employers and people who work in the workplace with people who may practice faiths and beliefs that are not their own. There's a couple of difficulties. One is there is an assumption that everybody who practices a faith or belief looks different from you, speaks differently from you, eats differently from you, and that's not always the case. And secondly, there's also an assumption that those people will be in a space where they can explain their faith or belief to you. And certainly from the Islamic perspective, you know, when 9/11 happened, you know, all the media was out there looking for the Muslim on the corner to make a statement, and the damage that actually did made Muslims afraid to actually speak, because they knew that they were actually representing their religion. And we're not all good at our whole religions or faiths. We do bits of it, we do parts of it. Some of it is you know, impacted by our culture. And so people may not want to be in, or may not find themselves in a position where you may be open, you may want to engage and learn. They may not be confident enough to be able to tell you. They may not feel like they can speak from any authority on teaching, you know, you about the Sikh religion, or being a Druid, or you know, Druids and pagans and Wiccans have been highly persecuted, and so, you know, people keep to themselves. So the difficulty is, while the goodwill is there, and the goodwill across Somerset, I must admit, for interfaith and belief engagement is huge. It is really huge. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing to see. But, you know, my recount of that lady's conversation, there's a lot of work to be done, but at least, you know, we're starting somewhere, and that's great. But people also assume that people who are going to have issues in the workplace around faith and belief are people who are different. But in actual fact, you know, there is a religion called Plymouth Brethren that actually started in Plymouth, and their followers don't eat with other people. So if you have a canteen or Friday drinks or birthday parties or whatever you're going to have in the workplace, they may not, I don't want to generalize about people from that faith, but the tenets of that faith say they do not eat with other people. So they may not participate, and they may not want to say why they're not participating. And that's their right. It's their right to say, I don't want to participate, and people to say, okay, all right, you're free to participate, or you're free not to participate. The same as with Jehovah's Witnesses. So people who are very orthodox about the tenets of their faiths, you know, some of those faiths actually say you do not engage socially with people who are not of your faith. And these are white, mainstream looking people from Somerset. And so the assumption made that, oh, I don't really have anybody in my workplace that is other, may not actually necessarily be true. And so, you know, the thing of, oh, there's no Muslims here or Sikhs here is, you know, I can tell my joke about faith or belief. It may be that we are hidden. We're not obvious. We're not the people that you think we are. And so, as Rachel was saying, these biases, which people often don't realize they have, or often think that they are, you know, innocent little comments or jokes, you really don't know who's in the crowd. And I think that's really important. And I think to get people to be able to engage about their faith in a workplace environment, or any environment, but a workplace environment, is really to open the lines of communication. And one thing that I've seen here in applying for jobs, and my son applying for jobs, is we've been given this form, this kind of diversity form, I think it is. And on it, it asks your religion or your faith. And of course, it says you don't have to answer any of these things. But I think it's actually a really good thing to answer, and to ask people to answer, because it opens the lines of communication. First of all, the owners, the managers, the people at the top understand they've got people of different faiths and beliefs within their work environment. And secondly, it also lets them know that you're going to be doing something different, and you should be able to, knowing that they know, you should be in a space where you can talk to them about it. So you've given this form in, it says I'm Druid, it says I'm Muslim, it says whatever it says. And then there's a festival coming up, and you want time off for that festival. So because you know your employer knows, that should open the lines of communication. That should be a space for you to say, well, I know, you know, I'm Druid. We have the summer solstice festival coming up, and you know, I just want to take a couple of. I know it's a time when we're busy and we don't usually have annual leave, but because it's this festival, you know, I'd really appreciate it. I mean, the only way anything happens in the world is through lines of open communication. That's the only. I mean, that's the only solution to anything, but the word is open. And so, for example, you know, Christmas parties, end of the year events, things like that. There's this difficulty that arises around wanting to be inclusive of people. So, for example, Plymouth Brethren and Jehovah's Witnesses are not going to come to your Christmas party or your end of year event if they are, you know, adhering to the tenets of their faith. Now, I'm not saying every Jehovah's Witness and every Plymouth Brethren's not going to turn up. They might, but it's their choice. But the difficulty is when we are, so there's, for me, and what I say to people, there is a difference between being inclusive and including. So inclusive is the majority of the workforce adheres to the practice of Christmas, whether they are Christian or whether it's just a cultural practice. And so they want to have a Christmas party because it reflects their culture, their faith. But now we've got a few people in the group who don't have anything to do with that. And so then the whole group is told, no, we can't have a Christmas party because other people in the group are not Christians. So it's got to be an end of year party. So those few people in the group who are not Christians get blamed by the majority for cancelling Christmas. And nobody said, I want you to cancel Christmas. And so there is this difficult. So being inclusive is saying we're going to have an end of year party and no one's traditions are going to be recognised. It's going to be a generic party where we come together as people and we have a good time and we celebrate what we've achieved for the year together as a group. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But if you want to support the fact that your community, your work community is made up of people from diverse faiths and beliefs, you then say, we're having a Christmas party. Those people who want to be involved in organising it, I need 12 people. Please put up your hand and come and organise it. Now, you may find the Sikhs and the Muslims put up their hands and go and organise the Christmas party. You never know. But what it actually says, and then you say to the rest of the group, the Christmas party is happening at such and such a time. Please come. We want to include you in our celebration. And so that's including. It's actually saying we're one group, we recognise everybody, and we recognise people have different faiths and beliefs. Now, when you have 80% of the population of your workforce is Christian, what do you do with the other 20% who may be, you know, one Muslim, one Baha'i, one Plymouth Brethren, you know, one Rastafarian, one shaman, and then you go, are we going to have parties for all of these events? And not necessarily. It can be people who are in marginalised, was that what somebody said? Marginalised, thank you. Marginalised faith and belief groups understand they're a really small percentage of the population. And so they just want to be recognised. So it could be a policy that, okay, it's Eid. We're all going to send an email to Janine and Jasna because it's Eid. And we're just going to send a beautiful Eid greeting. And that's enough. We've been recognised. We have been told that we're part of this work community. We've been invited to the majority's event. If it's going to be Christmas, obviously, if it's going to be an end of year party, then, you know, we've got to be part of organising it. But if it's going to be a Christmas event, we've been invited because we're valued members of the group. And then we've been recognised on our own faith or belief festival. So I think the difficulty is people think that it's all or it's nothing. So it's either, you know, we've all got to get rid of Christmas, or we've all got to, nobody can bring chocolate eggs in for Easter, you know, because, you know, I mean, there are particular Christian groups who don't celebrate Easter either. And so it's a minefield. It's an absolute minefield of do we just wash it all away and pretend nobody exists? Or do we actually try and learn from each other and engage in the various practices people have? And I think the way to build a cohesive community, one where threads are strengthened to weave a fabric of a nation, is to actually recognise people have different faiths and beliefs and speak to them about how they can be supported in those faiths and beliefs in the workplace, about how conversations can be had, how religious practices can be recognised. So, for example, I also think it's a really great thing to have that form, because then if you know if someone's Muslim, and if anybody has worked with Muslims or are Muslims who've been in the workplace, our celebrations move. So we can't say Christmas is on December 25th. We can say, well, Eid might be on May 1st or 2nd, or it might be the 3rd, depending on when the moon is sighted, and we won't know until the night before. And people go, what? And so, you know, it's really difficult. It's difficult to have that conversation as a Muslim. And it's also really difficult, Justin, you can tell me to stop when I'm ready to stop. It's also really difficult to have that conversation the other way around, because while you come along and say, can you tell me when Eid is, that person goes, my gosh, no, I can't tell you what Eid is. I don't know when Eid is. If I knew, I would tell you. So it's really all about communication. It's all about having a safe space for employer and employee to be able to discuss what their needs are. And everybody gets it wrong all the time, both ways. And there's nothing wrong, as everybody else has said, with getting it wrong. The appreciation is that you've tried. And in trying, a conversation starts. And in trying, lines of communication are open. And so that's all we can do. That's all we can do to have a inclusive workplace where people feel included. And there can be policies. I mean, Greg has spoken about policies which have to be there because people's rights have to be respected. But from a workplace on a community and a human level, it's really about saying, I don't understand, tell me. And that's not what's going to work for us as an employer. How can we work it out together? And that, for me, about faith, well, about race, about everything, but certainly about faith and belief. We need to be strong and brave enough to be able to say, I don't understand, tell me. That's it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Janine. Amazing. That was just so informative. I mean, I didn't even know about the Plymouth Brethren. I had no idea. So just, and we always assume, don't we, that it's these kind of foreign religions that are so different and things like that. So it's really interesting with the example that you've given, that actually it's, you know, it's here and, you know, part of the Christian faith as well. So amazing. Any questions for Janine from that? No. Okay.
It's not really a question. It's more just like an observation, I guess. Just to say thank you, Janine, because I've got quite a few family members who are Jehovah's Witnesses, and the only time like Jehovah's Witnesses ever come up in conversations that I've heard people was like, oh, they're poor kids, like they don't have birthdays, they don't have Christmas. And then people are always shocked when I say, oh, actually, like my aunties and my uncles are JWs, and you know, like I get a bit defensive on their behalf. But I don't know, I think that's just like the first time I've ever actually heard them mentioned in terms of like, how can we be inclusive? And yeah, like how can we include them? So it's just really nice that these conversations are happening. And I know when I tell my auntie, she'll say, she sounds like a lovely lady. But yeah, it's just like really positive.
And I think that's the common thread, isn't it, Janine, with all these different speakers that we had. It's that communication, and there's that actively listening and putting what you hear into practice as well, people's opinions and people's views. And that's really is the common thread. And the other thing I would say is the importance of sort of representation, having representation out there. I know Rachel touched on it with the Black Fairy, and she got ever so excited and sent me the little picture and things. And I think I was just reflecting as a child, I would never have seen myself as a fairy. I couldn't be a fairy because I wasn't white, you know. So representation really does matter. It really makes a big difference. And just very quickly, when I was growing up, there weren't Asian women particularly on TV, or I grew up in Somerset, didn't know anybody. So for me, I was seeking representation, and the only real place I found it was on TV, but it was the Cosby Show. You know, it was that representation. I was like, okay, well, there's a girl on the Cosby Show, you know, and that fits into my life, and she's young and I've got brown skin, she's got brown skin, so therefore, and it's always searching and saying that it's okay. So when we talk about recruitment, we talk about adverts, we talk about those kind of things, representation makes a really, really big difference to get people from those diverse backgrounds to say, yeah, okay, you know, this organization is really inclusive and I feel comfortable here.
But not just representation in a positive life, it's representation in the negative life. So I grew up mainstream Catholic white girl, and then I spoke one sentence, and all of a sudden I was minority Muslim other. And then all of a sudden everything came into focus. And I went, oh yes, me, Mrs. Unbiased me. Oh my Lord, I gotta watch my P's and Q's. I realized, you know, but what I found in bringing up Muslim children was that every villain was a Muslim. every villain. So my children are white-skinned people, and until they say their names, no one knows that they're Muslim. They don't ever have to declare it. And so they see representation of themselves on television in everything. But the only representations they see of Muslims is the baddie, is the terrorist. Even subliminal things, like no one mentions anything about Islam, but all of a sudden the terrorist is wearing a Palestinian scarf, you know, and the word Islam is never mentioned. No one mentions. So these subliminal issues of the fact that, you know, and as, you know, Vienna was saying, that the experiences of people that they've had is this constant chipping away of people, even people who appear to be in the mainstream, part of the mainstream. You just never know. You never, ever know. And so, you know, as we've all talked about, is to have this openness. And we want people to be open about ourselves. We want people to understand us. We've had a bad day. Somebody died. I lost my job. You know, we've had a trauma. We want that. And we have to give that back. We have to offer it back. And that's really all it's about.
Brilliant. Thanks, Janine. We're running short of time slightly, so if I can have your question at the end, Vienna, if that's okay, if we have time. We're going to go on to Ram now, and he's going to talk about the British Army and racial diversity and inclusion. And he's the Army Engagement and Diversity Team Leader. So over to you, Ram.
Thank you, Jasna, and thank you, everyone. Absolutely delighted to be here. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see this now?
No, can't see your screen, unfortunately, Ram. We can see you, but not your screen.
Just a second.
Well, your screen's gone.
I have my PowerPoint presentation ready,
Okay.
but I'm
You just want to talk through it then instead. Just talk us through without the presentation.
Yeah, okay. I'll go through without presentation.
Okay.
It's I don't know what is happening.
Yeah.
So as I said, yeah, my role.
Your camera is sorry, Ram. Your camera's not on either. Do you want to turn your camera on? Or is it on?
Was it done?
Yep. There you go. Perfect.
Yeah, sorry for mix up. I don't know what is happening. Probably I'm not very IT guru, so sorry for that.
Not a problem.
As I said, my role as the diversity team engagement leader is basically to go out to various communities, focus on specifically ethnically diverse communities, and talk about the British Army, and most importantly, to highlight about the importance that the British Army of today put the priority sort of direction on the equal opportunities in the army. Maybe 15-20 years ago, probably it was not the case, but obviously that is where we are now. So I would like to introduce myself a bit more, because as you know, I'm from diverse background as well, and I'm not British. I am Buddhist, also Hindus as well, and because Hindus and Buddhists are quite similar. So I was born and I grew up in a very small village in Nepal. If you don't know where Nepal is a very small country in between China and India, and obviously we Gurkhas, I don't know how many of you know about the Gurkhas, but Nepal is home country of Gurkhas, and this year marks 207 years of continuous service in the British Army for Gurkhas. So it is a very proud history. As I said, we are not British, but obviously we are part of the British Army. So I have been serving in the British Army for 38 years now, quite a long time. So my journey started in 1985. I joined as a soldier and progressed through the ranks, and I'm an officer now. So my career has been almost sort of 50-50. So almost 17 years as soldier's career, and then 17 years as sort of officer's career. I have had the opportunity to serve in Afghanistan 4 times, Kosovo, Bosnia, and obviously traveled around the world on exercises and various commitments. I have absolutely no regret in joining the British Army, because I was following my father's footsteps, and I think I have achieved many things beyond my expectation. And I think if I share only one thing with you today, is that of British Army provides opportunities to all. I think regardless of your background, as you can see, I'm the guy from a hill, remote village from Nepal, but obviously I had a very successful army career. So everybody can have a very successful army career. And as you can see, English is not my first language. I started actually speaking English when I joined the army in 1985. So please forgive me if I pronounce some English words wrongly. What I'm going to talk about today is about British Army's diversity, equality, and inclusion, focusing a bit more sort of what Army is doing about it. Obviously, there are lots of talks, lots of discussion. But what I'm gonna tell you about is what is actually British Army doing today. I would like to sort of start by British Army's in-state of diversity and inclusion. As I said, we had quite a lot of negative publicity in the past, but now British Army is driving very hard in this space nowadays. And our in-state is an army that is justifiably recognized as a demonstrably inclusive employer that respects difference, attracts talent from all areas of society, overtly embraces equality of opportunity, and always challenges unacceptable behavior. So that is our in-state. And as I said, from my 38 years of British Army, I must admit that Army has moved forward significantly and made some progress in this space. As I said, maybe 15-20 years ago, it was not the case. And I'm not saying we are perfect yet, but there are a very clear sort of intent from the top now. Therefore, every level in the Army are aware the importance of diversity, inclusion, and I'm going to talk about sort of equity as well, and inclusion. So, as I said, I think we're on the right track, but there are still some things to be done in the army as well. And I think earlier on, Greg clearly explained about diversity and inclusion, but also equality as well, because Army recognizes the importance of racial equality, because it's not the same as equality, and that's why Army provides equal opportunities, same resources, and empowers all of them, all servicemen, women, fair opportunities, regardless of their background, race, gender, sexual orientation, or any religion, whatever religion you are from. It is to remove barriers and, most importantly, to progress to their full potential in the Army career. And nowadays, there's absolutely zero tolerance or any form of discrimination, bullying, harassment, or racism in the Army. As I said, it's a significant move forward nowadays, and every single person in the Army expect respect, resources, and opportunities, and fair treatment in their workplace, wherever they work, in the UK or around the world. And obviously, while significant progress have been made, we still have a lot of scope for improving to make the essential cultures change necessary to ensure we are continue to be open and tolerant and fair organization. And in the recent years, Army has taken a wide range of actions to improve diversity, equality, and inclusion. These actions have some positive impact. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. If we look at current Army strength, we are about sort of over 79,000 regular soldiers and about 25,500 reserve soldiers, making about sort of 105,000 strong, both regulars and reserves. And if we look ethnically diverse communities representation, that is 11,300 personnel currently, which is about 14.3% of the regular Army. It seems a bit small representation, but this is a continuous increase of 4% in the last 3 years. And it is currently on upward trajectory, and the target is to reach by 15% by 2025, and we are well on track to achieve that target. And the Army also aims to continue to engage and increase recruiting from fantastic talents from the diverse communities. And it has implemented a series of initiatives to improve in recruiting. Those include increased use of authentic role models, and there are dedicated posts focused on recruiting underrepresented groups, and we'll continue to research to better understand the barriers to application process. And also there are a number of strong networks and diversity champions and employee support networks to our soldiers from the day they join until the day they retire from the Army. And every soldiers and officers has access to these support networks throughout their Army career. And we have specifically got Army Multicultural Support Network. We used to be called BEM network before, but Army also changed this to Army Multicultural Network. This is recently done, and aim is to support all service personnel from different race and cultural background. And this network is within the Army is rapidly growing. And there's a lot of work, a lot of talk about sort of pay gap. But what we have in the Army a very sort of standard pay scale, so that everyone, regardless of gender or race, in the same role, they receive exactly the same level of pay. And any sort of other benefits, for example, we have some fantastic benefits in the Army, free gymnasium facilities, free dental, free medical, and so much other things, and they are all equal to everybody in the Army. And also not only the facilities, but Army employs a vast and very varied range of roles. Probably you would be surprised to hear that there are more than 200 roles in the Army. Perhaps when people see soldiers on telly, they all sort of think about the sort of fighting soldiers or driving tanks or all sorts of sort of killing people, etc. But there are lots of other jobs. Those you see on tellies, that what we call is frontline roles. That is only 30% representation of whole Army, and 70% of the others are supporting the combat roles, i.e. frontline roles. And all these jobs, from, as I said, combat soldiers to engineers to doctors to dentists to nurses, lawyers, accountants, vet, cyber specialists, communication specialists, you name it, everything. And these are all open to everybody, regardless of race or any background. And probably you are already aware, even the combat role is open to female soldiers as well. So all our female soldiers, officers can now serve with male colleagues if they want to serve in frontline, and if they have abilities. So obviously that demonstrates that we care about our people, because obviously people are our sort of our own strength, but competitive as well, because without people, Army cannot function. So that is why it is very important. And also we know that obviously we need to do more. Therefore, we, especially at leadership level, we have sort of what we call inclusive framework. I think Greg mentioned earlier on as well about it. We have sort of certain Army framework for inclusion. And the first part of inclusion, which obviously I wanted to show you on the screen, but obviously I couldn't do that. So diversity and equality and inclusion, as we clearly understand, is that it must be delivered from a very good leadership, not only from the top, but it is all level of Army organizations or Army workplaces. And every sort of level, every organization, they have got a very clear mandate and clear direction and guidelines from the top. And every sort of line managers within workplaces are responsible for inclusive behaviors, education, and awareness in their workplaces. And we specifically have sort of framework that highlights what we call is setting the tone first, which means with commitment, policy, practices in workplaces, and being the example of inclusive behavior. And most importantly, setting the parameter for acceptable behavior. That is what we call sort of setting the tone within workplaces. And another one, obviously, followed by what we call lifting the rock, which is about understanding our people, their lived experience, and knowing their sort of personal circumstances and perspectives, so that obviously everybody knows within the team about their background, and that creates sort of respecting each other and a culture of sort of respect for others as well. And the final part within that framework is active integration, what we call. This is by harnessing the power of diversity and bringing all together as one team, and developing team ethos by proactively seeking opportunities to develop a mutual understanding and respect. And part of this, Army recently launched an initiative or new campaign called operational teamwork. This is called sort of ops teamwork. This is again, the aim is to sort of embed inclusive behavior into our culture now. So with evolution, it comes the DNA of future generation, and to challenge especially behaviors that are counter to team ethos. And this was sort of very directed, sort of stop all activities and focus on teamwork training. So everything stop, and every workplaces do their sort of teamwork training. And this is for an opportunity to sort of raise genuine concerns at the lowest level. And it was received very well, because this obviously gave opportunities for our sort of all service personnel, even our civilian staff, to speak up genuinely without fear. So that's still ongoing, and the next one we have is in February. And again, this is sort of all stop day, and we focused on sort of our teamwork and understanding each other, which is significant forward. And obviously, sort of my final part, I just want to sort of briefly touch on sort of training we focus on to sort of get people to know about the importance of inclusion within their workplaces. And obviously, as I said earlier on, there are mandated sort of policies and guidance in place, and every member of British Army are mandated to conduct 2 behavioral training within a year. And every establishment in the Army at even lowest level, we have diversity inclusion advisors and diversity inclusion practitioners. Their job is to sort of be impartial and obviously monitor within that workplace how diversity, inclusion, and equality are taking place, how the practice policies are taking place, etc. And they help our people to improve, but also if they have got any issues, being impartial. And also, I think earlier mentioned as well, we have.
Sorry, Ram, could I stop you there, if that's okay? We're just running out of time.
That's fine.
Martha's kind of
joined.
From one meeting to another, if that's okay. Because we've got a few minutes to the end. Thank you so much for your presentation, though, Ram. Thank you, and just really
thank you very much.
How the Army has changed from from when I was growing up, and just different perspectives really. So yes, Ginny, we'll wait for questions at the end if that's okay, because we're really running short of time. Hi, Martha. So Martha's going to talk about racial discrimination in the workplace. Martha is an outreach worker for SARI, which is Stand Against Racism and Inequality. Not much time, Martha, but if you can make it a little bit more concise, that would be perfect, because we need to finish by 12:30, if that's okay. Sorry, we can't hear you, Martha. Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay, fine. I'm sorry for the delay. Basically, racial discrimination in the workplace is covered under the equality law. I don't know if you have covered that today, but we have 9 protected characteristics that employers need to take into consideration when dealing with employees. And these are race and equality, disability, age, religious or beliefs, sexual discrimination, age, and gender reassignment. So sexual orientation, gender reassignment, maternity and paternity, one of the ones that is more trashed in the workplace, marriage and civil partnership. So all those parts, 9 protected characteristics are part of the equality law. And out of that, 5 of them, they are part of hate crime. But within the workplace, what we see constantly is that employers tend to discriminate. And when it comes to discrimination, you can discriminate directly if you, for example, do not want to employ someone. In certain circumstances, for example, joining the army, there will be some requirement that the person needs before they can join the army, or they can become a pilot, or maybe you want to become a priest. But when it comes to, for example, indirect discrimination, if an employer doesn't want to employ someone, they could use indirect discrimination by ruling out the type of people they do not want. They sometimes look at their surname, maybe where they live, the university they attended, and so on, and they would sort of rule out those people. Or they discriminate by association if they belong to a group or a community. The other one would be discrimination by perception, when a person perceives they're part of a community or group because of the name or because of the way they look. They perceive that person could be part of the community, and they tend to discriminate. Other things that we see in the workplace is harassment. And harassment is those tiny little things that really drive people mad. And it may be, for example, mispronunciation of the name, ignoring that the person wants to be have any specific pronouns, talk about the way the person lived, how they dress, maybe the food they consume in the canteen. All those can become harassment. And if a person sometimes stands for an individual that has been discriminated, sometimes what we see in the workplace is victimization. So you stand up for a colleague that is being harassed, and then you get victimized because of that. The Equality Law of 2010 protects the employee. Now, the role of the employer, it must to ensure that all employees have the right to work in a safe environment without discrimination or fear of harassment or abuse. When many employers have policies of bullying or harassment at the workplace, equal opportunity or anti-racist policy, it needs to be important. They must be in place for some time, and they could be reviewed. And when it comes to reviewing your policy, it's important that you actually take in consideration the view of the employee, that you actually do something to allow employees to review or give you some ideas of what they want to say, and bring the trade unions into place if you have them in the place of work. Now, what the law says when it comes to health and safety, all applies risk of violence, including verbal abuse. It needs to be taken in consideration. People need to work in a safe place, and the health and safety board at employers must ensure that reasonable measures are taken to protect any employees from racial or physical abuse because of their race or ethnicity or gender. And the other part that we need to take into consideration is, what are you doing as employers to make those things to be ready? Have you promoted a zero tolerance policy? If you yourself are not bringing down people's behavior, you could be considered to be part of it. ensure you have policies that dealing with bullying and harassment in the workplace. And these policies actually are put into place. Train all the staff around these policies. It's not just a question of creating it and leave them in a folder, but actually give them the training and awareness about the policies, and have systems in place to support the affected staff. If someone comes to you and say they've been victim of harassment, they've been victim of bullying, they've been victim of racial abuse, you need to have a system in place to support that staff. And review those mechanisms on time. And when you review, as I said before, it's important that you review it, taking into consideration the view of the employees, that you actually listen to the feedbacks. The other thing that you have to take on consideration is have you created good policies? Are these policies that you have actually consulted employers? Are you following the law when you're actually creating the policy? Are you listening to what your workforce is telling you? Are you reviewing it? How frequently do you review it? And when it comes to review, who is sitting at the table doing the review? Is it just yourself and management, or do you have someone from the workforce sitting at the table? And how are you providing the training? How are you providing the training to the employers, to the managers, to the assistants, to those who are in charge of groups, so they know what to look for, what to do and not to do? And they have to have some kind of level of cultural competency. What do I do? Is it correct? What I'm able to do, for example, if you are not an expert in certain cultural aspects, you need to ask someone or deal with someone or refer to someone actually who can tell you and explain to you. And don't be feel, for example, downfall that if you don't know what is that you need to know about certain religious or group of people, you can ask someone. And as I say, and you sort of require the post from an expert to help you to navigate. I mean, it's not easy at the moment. For example, we have many changes in the way we speak to people, in the way we refer them, and the use of pronouns and so on. And sometimes people find these things difficult to understand. So it's a case of asking someone who knows what to do, what they can do. And if you're looking for assistance and support, I certainly would recommend the TUC. They have excellent reports and advice. ACAS when it comes to legislation, when it comes to do's and don'ts, so you know exactly what is it that the laws require from you. There is organization like Union Learn, where you can send your employees to have free learning and education. And when it comes to documents, the Equality and Human Rights Commission will tell you everything in relation to what is expected for an employer. And one guidance that I would recommend in all sectors is the health and safety legislation from the government, which is there easy find it in their website. I think I have covered everything. If it's anything else that you need to know, I will be more than happy to sort of explain. I mean, that was a whistle tour.
It was a whistle-stop tour, but it was amazing as well. Yeah, really, really informative. I love the bit at the end where you've given, you know.
And I do have some links and information that I can send to Jasna, and she can forward it to you, because if I try to do it now, I would probably mess it up with the internet and that.
Not a problem. I'm going to send out an evaluation as well to everybody, so I can put, if anyone else has any websites, links, books that they'd like to share with me, I can put that all down and send it out to everybody that's here as well. But thank you so much, Martha. I know you were running from one meeting to the other, and I was thinking, oh, time is running out, so that's amazing. Just to wrap everything up, really, I thought to myself, how do I wrap it up? And I've just been writing sort of words and little sentences as everyone's been talking. I thought, you know what, I'm just gonna read this out, and I think it just brings it all together. I think what's come across really strongly all the way through is that engagement, that communication, really, really listening and implementing, not just listening, you know, but really, really implementing that. Equity, inclusion, the difference between inclusion and diversity. The other thing we didn't really touch on was that some organizations prefer assimilation rather than inclusion. And again, that's not very helpful, because it's like, come into our culture, this is how we do things, rather than let's look at what needs to change. challenging allyship, being aware of your own power, unconscious biases, microaggressions, the importance of representation, what white privilege is and examples of white privilege, marginalization, cohesion, having that safe space to talk about different issues. It's okay to get it wrong. It's okay, talk about it. Everyone is going to get it wrong. Don't be afraid of that. Reflecting on your own biases and having policies, but actually putting those policies into practice and always scrutinizing your organization and what policies you have and things like that, and having that kind of open communication. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's what I've been scribbling down as everyone's been talking, but I've just found it amazingly informative, and I've loved the way that all the different strands have kind of come together, and it's just been really, really holistic. Any last thoughts or comments as we close? Who wants to say anything else? No? Oh, Janine has her hand waving. Go on, Janine.
Sorry, I couldn't find the little hand. And it's okay to ask for help. If you don't know, ask.
Yeah, asking. That, again, communication, engagement. We're humans, that's what we should be doing. Brilliant. Thank you so much for everyone. Thank you for the speakers. Thank you for participating. I think it's been really nice that it's been a smaller group, because it kind of opens and facilitates a little bit more in-depth discussions about little things that it might be a bit more scary in a larger group. So thank you all again. Joe, did you want to say something, or were you just showing yourself? No. Okay, brilliant.
Well, thank you. No, I've got low bandwidth. It's really annoying. So I just thought I'll switch a video off and see if it helps. But no, it's been absolutely fantastic. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Brilliant. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much to all our speakers. Take care. Bye now.